Let us go with him so that we may die with him. Amen. Certainly at first glance, it was a long reading, just as the last 3 weeks have been long readings. It feels as though we've stood for about 5 minutes, and I suspect we actually have, because the stories are long. And yet, once I looked at this reading and started to read, my mind went with the story. It entered into this most amazing story that we think we know. This story of Lazarus rising from the dead, and it's like a drama. I don't know if you noted that. Every time we get to the point that Jesus wept, I can hear this brooding underneath the words. I hear a wind moving. It's as though I am watching a drama on the silver screen. Because at times it feels like we are. And not see these words and hear these words without this deep sense of lights, camera, action, and yet in the flesh. And at center stage is Jesus. No matter all the other characters, all the other people that enter from these stage right and stage left, it doesn't matter whether it's the disciples who are following along, or Mary and Martha as they go and meet him, or the Jewish folks who keep following him, trying to, trip him up. You may have heard they wanted to stone him, yet they wanted to see as well. Jesus is the center of this story, not even Lazarus. Enter St. Thomas. Thomas comes in and says this one little line, nothing else. In fact, he's just one of the crowd. And he listens to Jesus and he turns to the disciples and said, let us go also so that we may die with him. So that we may die with him. See, Thomas is one of those odd figures of the scriptures. He doesn't get a lot of airtime, but he gets just enough. And in this one, this odd statement, okay, go with him so that you may die with him. Yes, we just heard that Lazarus was dead. And yes, we heard that Jesus was to raise him from the dead, but somehow Thomas knew something else. Who was the him? It doesn't always give a clear definition as to who the him had to be and who was. But Thomas takes this emphatic stance as he turns to the rest of the crowd that was also listening to Jesus, that was also engulfed in this story of sleeping and walking in the daytime. And he looks at everybody in the eye. Let us go also. That's it. Let us go and face the jaws of death with him. He will not be alone. He will never be alone, nor will we. Now, a few chapters down the line, Jesus will have fed his disciples, right? We're going to go to that same table in just a few minutes. Jesus will have laid out bread and wine. Jesus will have sat and washed the disciples, these disciples who went of death. And he will say to them, you and they're still trying to figure that out. And then all of a sudden, Jesus is teaching again. You may have noted it, right? It starts with teaching, and then all of a sudden, Thomas tells them to go. And he does this again. Jesus is talking about many mansions. Remember that statement? Jesus is going to prepare a place for us. And Thomas said, Lord, I got no clue where you're going. Literally, he says this. Show me the way. Jesus, no less, doesn't chastise, doesn't do anything, just says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Thomas, out of the blue, who's understood as a little simpleton, you could say, changes the course of the entire story. And of course, we know, at least we think we may remember, the most famous, where Jesus has been raised from the dead, and Thomas is like, I have no clue that you actually did this. It's like he's questioning his own statement. The statement that he said, we're going to go into those jaws of death and we're going to walk with Jesus, but hold on, we don't know where you're leading us. And no, you didn't die. You can't be raised from the dead until Jesus shows him and has him touch that open wound of blood and of water. For somehow, some reason, Thomas knew the story. Even when he backtracked, even when he stepped forward, he knew something was up. Did he think back to Bethany on that day? Did he remember the conversations that were had? Did he remember Mary and Martha? Did he remember who was raised from the dead? Was Thomas aware of all that he had said when he said, we're walking into the jaws of death? He becomes the linchpin. Without him, this story would make no sense. This odd little statement. Before the whole of it, Jesus is teacher, rabbi, the one who gathers. And Thomas's statement, Jesus is the prophet and the one who raises everyone from the dead. Hand back away from Thomas and go back to the spotlight that Thomas always had on Jesus. In these three little cameo appearances by Thomas, it was never Thomas that was at the center. It was Jesus, the one whom he loved, the one who loved him. And that drama, with all the wind and the flames and the excitement and the emotions, came to life as Thomas slipped away into that darkness, so that all we see is Jesus, Rabbi, teacher, Messiah, the one who raises us from the dead. Amen.